When I was getting ready to talk about that next question, I didn't feel like that's what we needed to talk about. As you can kind of see, we're going to talk about running on empty. And because I sat down to write that next question, but I kept hearing the words running on the empty. And I'll be honest, so I wrote this all up at the slideshow, and then I sent it to myself on Google, on Gmail. And my phone has alerts. And on Gmail, all of a sudden, I wake up the next morning on Saturday before I go, and the first thing says, Gmail, me, running on empty. Felt like a wake-up call. And, I feel like this is what we're supposed to talk about. And maybe this is more for me than anybody else, but this is a terrible place to be when you're running on empty. And you know what the Bible teaches? It teaches that we shouldn't be running on empty, that God allows us to take that time to refill. He's not worried about time as much as you are. And maybe that's the American in us, or I don't know, but it's we've got this idea that every second has to be accounted for. And the Bible shows that God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, they're not that worried about it. They kind of are at peace with this whole situation. And we're meant to be at peace. We just got out of this whole series there that Chad's taught about being anxious for nothing. And the thing that, he went through talking about how God never called us to be anxious. And that's true. And that's true with this as well. Now, some of us, we like this thing right here. We're never more alive than when your car's on empty and you've got it planned out. I've got 25 miles till I need to find a gas station, and you're like, Mount Vernon is 17. I've got this, and you've got it all planned out. And even though you don't really know if you've got 25 miles, but past experience has said, but sometimes we don't plan right, and the gas runs out a little too quick. But that can be disastrous in a life. We're not meant to run on empty. Let me tell you about 13 early signs of burnout. This is something I found in Forbes magazine. High levels of stress or anxiety. Well, duh. Everybody knows that one. You're feeling frequently on edge with adrenaline constantly coursing through your body. How about lack of engagement? You don't feel motivated to work. You have difficulty focusing or exhibit a short attention span. Increased cynicism. You have feelings of resentment or disconnection. You may notice yourself being more negative and cynical, feeling cranky and defensive, or snapping at people easily. You don't make time to talk on the phone or connect with the people who matter most to you. If you're feeling a lot of resentment towards others, the chances are it's because you're not getting your needs met and you're on the path to burnout. Distracted eating. You eat your meals in front of a computer, television, or while on the go. Not getting enough sleep. That should be obvious. When you're on burnout, you don't get enough sleep. Low energy or exhaustion. You're tired, not just sleepy tired, but emotionally fatigued. You may feel exhausted by the end of the day with no energy left to exercise or even engage with others. You just want to crash and watch television or zone out in some other way. There's never enough time. You always feel like you're running behind. I think all of us have felt that way at some time. Excessive worrying or a high level of self-criticism. You can't give yourself a break. You're always telling yourself, John, you got to do better. I use me because I've done this. So, physical illness. We know that. We know that what happens in the mind eventually travels out to the body and causes physical illness. And you start catching things easier. And that's one of the first things they teach you about in medical. That if you have high levels of stress, eventually it will lead to a physical illness. Numb feelings. This leads to an increase in addictive behavior, and it can show up. Initially, it starts with an excessive need for caffeine or sugar to stay alert, but can lead into harder things. Inefficacy. This is some ones that aren't on the screen. Experiencing diminished personal accomplishment, a perceived decline in competence or productivity, and expending energy at work without seeing any breaks. And on that same note, no breaks. You feel reluctant to take a vacation or to take a day off because you're always worried that there's more work back there, and that they can't run that place without you. And lastly, not enough exercise. Burnout. This is a very common thing in our world. I would say that at the hospital, I see several people that are exhibiting many of these behaviors. Where especially the caffeine one. I mean, I think every nurse's station I see has some kind of an energy drink around it, so it seems like it's a very popular thing. Let's look, though, in the Bible about a story, and we're going to start with a familiar one. I believe I used this one in one of my illustrations the other day. It's about the story of Elijah. And this is what happened after Mount Carmel. After Elijah won this great victory at Mount Carmel, he proved God over the 400 prophets of I'm trying to think of Ashtaroth and 800 prophets of Baal. He proved God was God because they couldn't produce him. And then because they failed, he had the people get rid of those prophets, the false prophets. And he was leading that. And then he went and told the king, you need to get home because this drought that's been going on for 3 years, that's getting ready to end. And he climbed back up on the Mount Carmel and he began to pray. And after praying several times, a cloud appeared. And Elijah took off to the gates of Jezreel, which was the king's city. But so had the king. And the king, he began to complain to his wife, telling her all his woes about how Elijah had done this and Elijah had done that. His name was Ahab. And it says, when Ahab got home, he told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah, may the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you have killed them. So this is the man that's just killed 1,200, or been a part of killing 1,200 false prophets in a valley, bringing back the people to God. And surely he stood there and he said, you will not pass, thinking Gandalf the Grey or something, that big scene there with Balrog, the big ugly demon thing that was coming at him down in the mountains. And if you've seen Lord of the Rings, you know where I'm at. But you think that's what Elijah would have done. But you know what Elijah did? Let's go to that next verse. Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day, and he sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. He's done. Feeling of trying to, he's done with life. He said, I'm done with it all. This is ridiculous. I'm tired of constantly living on the road, doing all these things. The past years have gotten to him. Because, see, in years past, during this whole drought, he was in hiding. And Ahab couldn't find him. Ahab had sent all of his men out looking for Elijah, trying to find him. And he couldn't find him. So Elijah had been kind of on the run for a while. Not in his hometown. And it's gotten to him. He's upset. He lay down and he slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, get up and eat. And he looked around, and there beside his head was some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank, and he lay down again. And then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, get up and eat some more. The journey ahead will be too much for you. So he got up and he ate and he drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. He needed refreshing. Before he presented himself to the Lord, before he committed that journey, he needed refreshing. After 3 years on the run, and then being chased by the evil queen, he needed to stop and refresh himself. And God knew that, so he brought him some sleep, and he fed him, and he gave him water, because he knew that there was still a great journey. So you ask how far this is, and I've put a map up here. So this is where he started, up here at Mount Carmel. And then the queen's palace was here in Jezreel. And then he traveled here to Beersheba, and then down here to Mount Sinai. That was, I looked it up, that is 260 miles. If you took it by car today, because of all the different things, I think they said it's something like 500 miles, because you have to weave in and out of the mountains and everything else just to take it by car. So we don't know if he did it as the crow flies, or if he took a well-worn path down there. But between 260 to 500 miles, that's about where this was. 40 days and 40 nights he walked. That's still impressive. I mean, when you think of that as 260 miles, what is that? That's roughly, he was covering quite a few miles a day in that space. But he walked. But he needed refreshing before he went on the next leg of his journey. And if he was allowed to take some time refreshing, why are we so afraid to take a little time and refresh ourselves when we're hurting? Why do we feel that need to keep plugging forward? Now, I know many of you have extra commitments. You have kids that need attention. I get that. But we have to be able to find those, and that's why we have to be intentional. We have to maybe take a few extra minutes before they get up. Maybe take 15 in the morning before they get up, and just recenter yourself on the things of God and go forward. We don't have a day to spend, or a couple days in the wilderness to spend just resting and relaxing, because there's demands on us when we have different things. But we can take a little time each day to be able to do things like that. Let's go forward. Oh yeah, sorry. We turn to this story in Mark 6:30 and 32. Let me tell you a little bit about what's happening here. So before this, Jesus stood up, and there's all these different men getting ready to be sent out. And he prayed over them, and he sent them out 2 by 2 all over the countryside. And then some of them started to come back. The apostles returned to Jesus from their ministry tour and told him all they had done and taught. But then Jesus said, "Let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while." He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. So they left by boat for a quiet place where they could be alone. Jesus wasn't worried. He didn't say, "Well, I'd love to sit and hear this, but you guys need to get back out there." No, he said, "Let's take a minute and step off out here, and we're gonna rest for a minute. And you can tell me your stories. We can kind of recap over things, and then we'll go forward." This is a good thing. So in the hospital, a lot of times, I will see several patients in the morning, and then a lot of times my boss calls me down about 11:30, and she wants me to come in her office, and then we discuss some of the patients that I've seen that morning, and we kind of go over it. And she asks me questions. How did you feel about this? And we go over this and kind of process emotions. Take a few minutes to process some of those emotions. But because we clear the board at 11:30, it gives me the strength to go back up there around 2 o'clock Because by the time, she usually takes about an hour to discuss the morning's activities and everything that's going on. And then I go grab lunch, and it's probably around 1:30, 2 o'clock before I go back up and I do another round before I go home. But she's a chaplain, and a good chaplain. Now, my old boss, he was about numbers. But Casey recognizes that when you're dealing with emotional issues, you got to take a minute to rest. I want to tell you guys a story here that according to Greek legend in ancient Athens, a man noticed the great storyteller Aesop playing childish games with some little boys. He laughed and jeered at Aesop, asking him why he wasted his time in such a stupid activity. Aesop responded. He picked up his bow and he loosened the string and placed it on the ground. Then he said to the critical Athenian, "Now answer the riddle if you can. Tell us what the unstrung bow implies." The man looked at it for several moments, but had no idea what point Aesop was trying to make. I bet Mike knows. Aesop explained, "If you keep a bow always bent, it will break eventually. But if you let it go slack, it will be more fit for use when you want it." There's a time for tension, and then there's a time to let go. And just right before this sermon, me and Gwen was talking about this. She said she appreciated when she worked in Flora that she had time after work to kind of decompress on the drive home, and to kind of put the day behind her, so that when she got home, she felt more like a person. And that decompression time is good. You know, to kind of put the day behind you and go forward with what you need to do. Pastor Greg talked about that. You know, he said he worked at the IYC, and he said, you know, he had to make sure he took some time as he was coming home to kind of put the correctional side of Pastor Greg and become the father when he walked in the door, because he had kids that needed his attention that hadn't seen him all day. We all have to take that time. Wanted to talk about the Apostle Paul. We've been talking about the Apostle Paul a lot lately in my sermons. And you remember when they were talking about turning the world upside down, the Apostle Paul paused where he was. He just finished in this city and he didn't know where to go next. And so they paused and they prayed. And it makes it sound like maybe they stayed there for a day, figuring out what the next move was. And during that time, he gets a dream about a Macedonian calling out for him, and he figured out the right place. So what I've shown you in the past few minutes is that the Father wanted Elijah to rest. The Son wanted the disciples to rest, and the Holy Spirit gives us a rest. They're not as worried about time as what we are. So what's my next question? Why are we? If all three perspectives of the Godhead aren't as worried about about time, why are we so worried about our time? And if we're called to be servants of God, why do we have that same mindset? Why do we allow the world's mindset of you have to do this, and this? Take some time. One last thing. I was reading the story about the axe. Two guys do it in a chopping contest, and the one guy he went to work at it. You know, he started chopping, and this other guy's over there taking breaks. And they get done, and he lost, and he couldn't understand it. And he asked the other guy. He said, "How did you beat me?" And he said, "You're no better than I am. We started at the same time." And the guy said, "Because when I was taking my breaks, I was sharpening my axe." He said, I was repairing the damage I had done and getting prepared to go again. That's what it is to take those little breaks inside there. As we kind of wrap up here, I've thought of a few points here. And I'm being a little slower today because I'm not quite sure. Me and Trey were talking about this before the sermon. Not quite sure what we're going to do here yet. One of the points that I have on here is we're going to take time to appreciate the things that God has provided. A grateful person realizes that it's not about them. They look at the many blessings in their life and they thank God for what they have. And it reminds them that it's not about me. Of course, we can seek God in prayer. Take that extra 15 minutes I talked about getting up just a little bit earlier and praying for just a few minutes before everybody else wakes up, and take that time to reconnect with God in the beginning of your day. And I'll bet you that 15 minutes you'll eventually turn into 30 minutes because you appreciate having that time, and you'll find that it focuses you for the entire day. Number 3, determine whether you're working for yourself or for God. Is it about me or is it about God in me? Earlier, a couple weeks ago, we talked about how if God is master, that means that we are his. But maybe we didn't take that vow so seriously at the beginning. And lastly, if you really find yourself checking off all 13 boxes, it may be time to talk to a Christian counselor or with me, or with a pastoral friend that you know. Take that time to just sit down with them and talk about some of these things and get that out. I was telling, I've got that group that I work with. They're taking my CPE, my class. And I said, I'm convinced that people in Southern Illinois, even though they don't like the Catholic idea of confession to a priest, it seems like when they see me, they can't help but tell me all the problems. And so maybe there's something to that. And maybe the very act of allowing somebody else to help us with our burdens can give us the help that we need. So here as we close, I just want to take some time, because here's what I know. I knew I was going to go in a different direction today, but I felt stopped. And I know that usually when I have stopped, that means that something else needs to be done here. And it may be about someone in this audience. So if you're feeling these feelings, or if you're feeling run down in any area, I'd like to pray for you. And I think our church would like to pray for you. If you'd like to raise your hand and say, that's me, I'd like to have people kind of get around and pray for you and put their hands or point their hands towards you and pray for you for a little bit. Anybody want to take me up on that offer? Okay, and Gwen, I saw back there in the back. Would some of our ladies like to go around the two of them and just pray for them real quick? Or if you're in front of them, you reach your hands back. But I just want you to pray for them. Take a few minutes to pray. And Trey's going to pray and kind of sing a song over these situations. And we're just going to take a few minutes. Is there anybody else? Are you feeling burnout? Are you feeling